Today we're going to begin talking about a very important aspect of ecosystems called biodiversity. And this is extremely important in every single ecosystem that we are going to come across. During this presentation, please take notes on your student notes sheet that you can download into Notability. And you will know which spaces to fill in by the red font that I've placed on certain words on my presentation. I will also put various pause points so that you can catch up to where I am at. Alright, so what is biodiversity? It's really just the variety and abundance of species in an area. So just how many different types of flowers are there, or how many different types of fish and how many of them are there in the ocean at various places. It's extremely important to have a very rich biodiverse ecosystem. So the density is referring to how crowded the area is. We're going to see that there is only a certain amount of animals that are going to be able to be in a certain area of land, and that becomes very important, especially when we talk about human population. Now, dispersion is actually how a population is spread out in its habitat, and there are three different types you can see here. There's a nearly uniform type of population, there's random, and then there's clumped. And different organisms rely on these different types of dispersion for their own maybe reproductive needs or for nutrition necessities. And we could think about 1,000 ways that organisms use these different types of dispersion. And we're going to see a few examples here in just a moment. Using this notes box, I'd like you to draw in those examples of uniform, random, and clumped dispersion that I just showed you. So draw that in here in this top box. Draw that in the top box here. And then we are going to come back to this chart, and I'd like you to use the pictures on the following slides to figure out what would be an example of these types of dispersion. So I'm going to show you some pictures of organisms, and I'd like you to try and fill in which type of dispersion you think they're expressing. So the first one that we have here is a school of fish. Another is a pack of wolves, and then we also have some bison. There's actually a bison over here, and then some sheep that are grazing in a prairie. Here we have some penguins, and then we have this lone tree over here. It doesn't have any other trees next to it. So try and fit these organisms into the type of dispersion that you think they express. And I'll go ahead and pause the video here and give you about a minute to go through this and put which ones you think fit there. Okay, so what we should have gotten is that the penguins were uniform, the lone tree was actually random, and then the pack of wolves was clumped. And if we think about a pack of wolves living together, we can think about how they could use this as a source of protection. We know that the penguins use this for protection from the elements, from the weather. We know that they clump together, or they stand together very close in a uniform fashion to stay warm. This random dispersion here is actually very uncommon. You won't see it very often, but it does happen, and it does typically happen with different types of plants and trees. So take this time now, I'll pause again and make some edits to your chart if you weren't quite right. Also, some of the things that could go in here would have been that school of fish. Clumped over here could have been the sheep with that random bison in there. So go ahead and make those edits if you need to now, and I will pause for another minute. Okay, not only do organisms use their dispersal qualities to kind of help them survive in the wild, but they also use different evolutionary strategies. The first one we're going to talk about is going to be R strategists, and these guys are typically very small with really high reproductive rates, and they also have really short lifespans. they have these high reproductive rates because they're essentially, they have as many offspring as possible all the time to be able to pass on as many traits and hope that, maybe one or two survive out of the 8 or 9 that are born. An example of that is going to be little baby mice, and then also these tadpoles over here. They make a ton of them so that hopefully a few of them survive. The K strategists, however, are typically very large and have a low reproductive rate. That means they don't typically have very many babies in their lifetime. They also have a pretty long lifespan. An example of this would be like an elephant, where it has its 2-year gestational period in order to be able to have its baby, and it's not going to have very many babies in its lifetime. Humans could be considered a K strategist. They are going to have very, typically few babies in their life, especially compared to these R strategists over here. And the gestational period for human is 9 months. I'll give you a moment, and I will pause here for you to be able to write down these different strategies. Okay, hopefully that was enough time for you to have gotten those written down. Now, also in an ecosystem, we talk about biodiversity and the number of organisms, but an ecosystem can only support so many species. And this is an example of limiting factors. So this limit is called carrying capacity, okay? Now, I have a chart over here where I have deer as the example, and up here is the carrying capacity. Deer are going to increase exponentially as long as they have plenty of resources, so things like food, water, shelter. And as long as they've got plenty of resources, they're going to continue to increase exponentially until they reach this carrying capacity. And that's typically where resources run out. There's just not enough space, not enough food, not enough water. Different ecosystems have different type of species that can live there with different carrying capacities for each of those. I'm going to go back here so that you can have a moment. I will pause here for you to be able to write down these blanks on your student notes sheet. Okay, and the final thing that we are going to talk about today is habitat versus niche. And what I'd like you to do in this blank space below your notes here is I'd like you to write down and brainstorm with your shoulder partner or someone in your area, what do you think a habitat versus a niche is? And I'd like you to try and come up with your own definition before looking ahead onto the notes, okay? So I'll pause here for about 4 minutes and let you look at these things and brainstorm. What do you think? What are the differences? All right, so let's go ahead and move on and look at what actually are the differences between habitats and niches. So a habitat is where a species has a specific tolerance for environmental conditions. It's going to help determine its habitat, so the general place where an organism can actually live. I have a graph here where, okay, they can maybe tolerate a little bit of this range down here of a habitat, but it's not the best place. Up here in our bell curve, which we've seen a bell curve many times before, up here, this is the optimum range. This is where the organisms will do very well in that area. Now over here, maybe these are too high of temperatures or too low of temperatures even. They might be able to survive here. I like to think of a habitat as a species' home, okay, where it will reside. Now a niche is going to describe not only the environment where it lives, but how it interacts with biotic and abiotic factors in the environment. Take a moment right now and please remind yourself and your partner, what are biotic and abiotic factors? I'll pause here for a minute for you to be able to figure that out. Were we able to remember abiotic and biotic? Hopefully you remembered that abiotic means non-living, so things like fire, weather, water, and biotic are living factors, things that can affect it, so other organisms, bacteria, plants, things like that. So a niche is how a species actually obtains what it needs to survive and reproduce where it lives. You might be able to think about this as a job, maybe. This is the organism's job, what it does in the environment that it lives in. Now, the term resource, I kind of referred to these earlier when I talked about limiting factors, can refer to any necessity of life, such as water, nutrients, light, food, space. Any of those things can really be thought of as a resource. What we're going to do now is we are going to get into quick groups of 3 and just come up with and brainstorm some ideas as to what you think this really cute baby fox in this picture might need to survive. Think about specifics, not just, oh, it needs water and food. We know that. But try and come up with some specific resources that this baby fox might need. Okay, what'd you come up with? What do you think? Let's use this time. Let's pause again really quickly and share out as a class. I'd like one person from each group to share one thing that they need, that they think this fox might need. Okay, now of course, not everything is all just fine and dandy in ecosystems. You do have to have competition, right? So by causing species to divide resources, competition helps to determine the number and kinds of species in a community and the niche each species occupies. I'll give you just a minute to make sure you get those words written down. Then you can come back and look at this nature of competition a little bit later. This is more of a diagram that I just want you to take some time looking at yourself a little later, okay? Now, niches do not overlap. No two species can occupy exactly the same niche in exactly the same habitat at the same time. If two species attempt to occupy the same niche, one's going to be better at competing for limited resources and will eventually exclude the other species. You can almost think of this as survival of the fittest. But instead of competing for similar resources, species are going to divide them. For example, the 3 species of warblers that I have here, they're going to split up the spruce tree that they live in, and they're going to be able to survive at different places and kind of cohabitate, but not within the other niche. Again, they're not sharing the same niche, they're splitting up and dividing the tree. So now I have a little brief video that is on Canvas that I'd like you guys to watch. It's only 2 minutes long and it's a pretty silly red fox. So please take this moment, watch this with your group of 4, and just discuss what you think about the red fox once you are complete.